Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the City of Port Washington's Common Council meeting on Wednesday night, February 22nd, 2023. Roll call, all but one alderman is here. 27th. Yeah, that's right. It's not Wednesday the 22nd. It's Monday. All but Alderman Tierney are present. So please join with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oh, he is okay. And Alderman Tierney is with us on the phone. Okay, I'm looking for an approval for the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions or concerns on the consent agenda? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, I have one request. As we're going through the agenda, I would like, if there's no opposition, to moving new business up to after public comments to allow for the Friends of Park and Recreation presentation, as well as the police or the fire department's organizational structure to help inform other items on the agenda. Does that sit well with everybody? Good. All right. Then under the mayor's business, I just have two very quick things tonight because this is a makeup meeting. First, just wanted to thank Catherine over at the Senior Center for providing me the opportunity to go speak with the seniors last week. That was a great conversation with all of the different people who were present. And then also want to thank the Port Washington Rotary for having me there last week. Then I'm going to move into officer and staff reports. Any questions from the officer or staff reports? I had one request, Rob, for Gary Peterson. These, the building permits that come out, is there any way that we could potentially get this as a running graph that just kind of shows month after month so we can see if there's any themes of permits dropping and what normal revenues would be, et cetera? Is that okay? I can talk to you. Okay. And then the other one, Ty, I'm really excited to see about Braids and Brews. My 18-year-old daughter won't go with me, but I might go down with Jonathan to we're going down to Inventor's Pub to learn how to braid our daughter's hair while drinking beer. Is that accurate? Yeah. That is progressive Park and Rec. We appreciate it. Okay. Then I'm going to move into public comments. Remember, as members of the community, you're welcome to speak to the council for up to 3 minutes. If you need more of the time than that, please contact myself or the city administrator. Are there any public comments at this time? Any public comments at this time? Any public comments at this time? All right. Seeing none, then we're going to move into the new business. So at this time, I would ask that the Friends of Park and Rec give us their presentation on the outcomes from the 2022 beer gardens. Welcome, Justin, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And forgive me, I thought there used to be a sign-in sheet where we're putting addresses down. Is that correct, or are we just verbally?
You're speaking for Friends of Park and Rec. So.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for
welcome.
having me this evening. So I'm pleased to share the results of our 15-week 2022 Beer Garden Series event. So we had 14 groups in this year's series, and the groups were the Port Washington Main Street, Kiwanis of Greater Port Washington, Port Saukville Rotary Club, the Port Washington Firefighters EMS Association, St. John's 23rd Men's Club, Environmental Planning Committee, the Port Gridiron Club, the Port Washington Historical Society, the St. John's 23rd School, the Friends of Niederkorn Library, the Port Washington Soccer Club, Ozaki Nonprofit Center, the Port Washington Saukville Arts Council, our Friends of Parks and Rec group, and on September 3rd, we actually had a collaborative group as we had one group that was pulling out, so we had to fill that rather quickly, but it actually went off very well. And the volunteers that served for that September 3rd day were the EMS firefighters, and then we included the Port Washington High School's golf team parents. We had members from Fish Day, Port Pride, and again, EPC. We had a full recap meeting with each of the groups on November 30th, where we presented them with the overall performance of the beer garden and issued them their checks. We also followed up a meeting just last month on January 6th, 2023. We've been accepting applications for the Beer Garden Series since the end of December, so just coming up a little over 2 months now. And we will sunset the application process tomorrow for this year on February 28th at end of day business, 5 p.m. Central Time. At both the November 22nd and the January 23rd meetings, we asked all community groups to promote their partnership and engagement through Facebook, Instagram, and other social media outlets. My vice president right over there, Ms. Wendy Brom, we're asking for everyone who's going to be partnering with us to work through her to have a mutually promotion day in a consistent manner. So Wendy does a fantastic job, so I wanted to say thank you, Wendy. Many asked about the beer trailer. I got to be the first to tell you it worked out great, and we had a variety of beverages this year, which worked out well for all groups. We only ran into one issue, and one issue only, and that was when the CO tank went out in week 11. But we improvised by using the other side of the beer trailer, but the other side of the CO2. So it actually worked out pretty well. The beer supply was available, and it was better this year from the 2021, and we hope that it will improve as we distance ourselves further from the pandemic. For food options, they were available to groups as a way to increase their take-home funds. And all of the tips, 100%, were given to the groups at the end of the evening, at the end of their respective evenings, I should say. We asked the group to provide their own food. Some chose pizzas. We got some wings. And they would keep the food sales to help offset their costs, which worked out extremely well. If the community group did not serve their own food, then the Friends of Parks and Rec cooked the food, or we reached out to other nonprofit groups in our community. So in essence, those new respective groups would become the food vendor. For the music side, we had a lot of talent in 2022. Variety of musical performers that included several new bands and musicians. We were again asking the community groups to list their preference of music for the 2023 series. Along that note, almost all 2023 musical acts for the evening sessions, which go from 3:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. are booked. And again, kudos to Wendy on that one. She's worked extremely hard with that. And the early sessions, which actually are from 1 o'clock to 3:30, they're still being worked out, but we're making huge progress. And looks like we'll be wrapping up those probably in the next several weeks. But we're still in February, so we got a great lead this year. Our great community groups had tremendous volunteer support. Many used a combination of our Sign Up Genius as well as their own schedules to ensure volunteers were available. And all Beer Garden weekends were fully staffed with a minimum of 4 to 5 volunteers. Our Beer Garden committee has been increasing. We meet once a month, and we picked up several new members. I believe as of today, we're at 7, and that is outside of our executive committee, and probably picking up 2 more in the next week or 2. So I just want to give a very big thank you to all the volunteers and Beer Garden committee members for that. And for the 2022 financials, each group received a check for $917.23, and of course, they got to retain all of their tips. Year over year, this number was a little bit lower than last year, or I should say the prior year, but that was due to higher costs of product, which we all know due to inflation, as well as other competing events and the weather itself too. For the 3 groups that cooked or provided their own food, where there wasn't any expense to our friends group, checks were slightly higher at $1,213.18. The Friends group, just like in all years past, did not take any additional percentage other than the 1/15th, since we were one of those 15 groups of the net income. I want to just take a moment just so everybody here knows that we as a group do not take 50% profit. It came to my understanding here at one of our meetings that is still out there. So I don't know where it came from or why, but we do not do that. We're here to support all of our community partners and our community at large. So I just wanted to clear the air with that and make it official. We are not taking 50% of net profit, net income. So I guess at this point, looking at our numbers and what we're at, we feel very good. We feel healthy. We feel that the Beer Garden Series has done has been going tremendously well. We've heard from many of the volunteers. We've heard from many of the patrons that are there that they enjoy it, and we just want to continue to add as much value as we can here to the Port Washington community, especially for the Beer Garden Series. So I want to say thank you to all of you for all your support, and want to open up the floor to anyone who has any questions or comments or anything that I can answer for the group.
Well, Justin, thank you and the Friends of Park and Rec for working with the Park and Rec to collaborate and continue that series. I appreciated the opportunities for improvement that you have identified for the different weekends and the different ways in which you guys are going to approach that in the future. Any council members have any questions? Mr. Sigwart?
Yep, real quick, Justin. The up to 50% came from your original proposal to the council.
You know,
That's where, just so you know, it wasn't made up.
No, you're right, John.
It was never implemented, but that's where it came from.
You know what? And you're right. I stand corrected. I do believe that I remember that we did discuss that at some point to go up to it. But I will give you my commitment and to the entire board up here that we are not looking to do that at all. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Any other questions? Alderman Postle?
Yeah, Justin, could you speak a little bit to the thought behind wanting to change two of the beer gardens to Thursday versus Saturday? And why you are asking to do that or considering that?
Sure. No, that's a great question, and thank you. It's a fair question. So one of the things that we've noticed is that during the last 2 weeks of the Beer Garden series, our attendance has dropped, and it's for several reasons. Some could point to the weather, but I know like last year, the last 2 weeks, we had homecoming was on October 8th, I believe, or October 7th, and so that attendance plus with Main Street, it just dropped very, very low. One of the things that we thought about was maybe mixing it up a little bit so we could capture the good weather, but also maybe doing 2 Thursdays in August. And by doing that, it opens up a couple different groups or maybe one group to take 2 of those Thursdays. But then also to put a little bit of spin on it, maybe from a 4 to an 8 or a 4 to a 9 with different types of music, different types of food or different venues. So ultimately what it gets down to us is that we have it staffed and we can do it, but for the dollars, for the groups, we really want to maximize that. And those are those last 2 Saturdays, it starts to change quite a bit once you hit into that last week in September or first week in October. That's a great question. Yvette.
Okay. Thank you for that. Anything else? Alderman Benning?
I guess, Justin, what do we need to do as a city from, your experience over the last couple of years? And I know there's been some challenges like with parking up there and some of that kind of thing. But are there anything else that we should be aware of that could improve, could help with the beer garden series going forwards?
That's a great question. And I thank you for asking that. I really do. I think that from my chair, I would say parking is probably going to be the number one issue. So working with our police, firefighters, everything, I think that is probably going to be the biggest piece. If the city is so inclined to throw in sponsorship dollars and marketing and advertising, I would be a fool to say no to that, because I think getting the word out and just to reinforce that we're all in this community together to support each other, I think that speaks volumes. But I don't know if that's entirely possible, but we will continue to do what we can just to get our word out through our social media outlets. But I think if you don't mind, I would love to have that conversation with my board and then get back to you by the end of this week. I think it's a great question.
Yeah. I'm assuming you're working with Tyler over there and
Yes.
he'd be your point of contact, but just want to see what we can work on if need be.
Sure.
The other question I have is why not June? Why do we skip June? And I've heard various stories, and I always struggled with September and October because the weather and the things like that. But June is nice weather, and I think we're missing June. So
I can tell you with confidence that has been something that we have discussed about moving that 1 week early, possibly 2. But I think that kicking it off, that 4th of July weekend, is really the big bang where we start from. But it's not off the table. I think it's a great suggestion.
Jonathan or Mr. Plater?
Thank you. Have you had groups that have been interested in Thursday night, or would it mostly be the Friends group that would staff those evenings?
No, we do have a group right now that would be potentially interested in that time,
Sure.
those times. Yeah.
Yep. I think when we met Park and Rec, it was still kind of TBD, but do you get better reception from the groups in November when you had a recap meeting with all the groups that participated? Would they feel better about 22 than 21?
Oh, between 22 and 21, they definitely did. Yeah. And I think looking ahead at this 2023 to 2022, I think they're even more ecstatic. That would be my opinion to it, just because right now I think, well, Wendy can speak on it, but I believe we are at 15 groups already filled, and we're still in February. And we do have others reaching out, asking if they can be the food vendors, which we're not opposed to doing that because it's just going to help out other groups as well, if we need it. You want to add anything?
As we presented to our Park and Rec board, we are very excited about 2023, and we are very organized and well ahead of where we've been in the past. Because this is the first year we as a committee, Justin, myself, Mike, and Christy, have been really in charge. We've been able to line everything up, do the things that we need to do, talk to the people we need to talk to. If I could go back to Alderman Benning's question, one of the things that we did discuss and talk about was possibly more signage about parking. It seems to be that the people that visit the beer garden are confused as to where they can park and what the signs say and what does that mean. And so if that can be something, I know I addressed where I reached out to Alderman Postel and the Traffic and Safety Committee to try and figure out how we can do that. That is going to require a conversation with Mr. Hingis and our Chief Hingis and our Chief Mitchell, so that we can because our first concern would obviously be exiting and being able to get out. And we have talked to Johnson Bus about the possibility on days when Tyler has booked other big events in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, that we are prepared for that if we've got something big going on. So.
We could work with the property owners on the bluff about selling their front yards as like Lambo for parking.
We've got flyers out there already.
Yeah,
We do,
yeah.
yeah.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate your work and stewardship on this, as well as the last like 2-3 years with the different direction you've taken, as well as innovations you've made, and you're continuing to serve our nonprofits and service clubs in town. So we're very grateful for that, and thank you for taking on this leadership. All right. Thank you. Thank you for your time tonight and putting this all together. And Tyler, thank you for collaborating with them.
Thank you.
All right, the next agenda item then we're going to move into, again, moving up, is the discussion regarding the Port Washington Fire Department organizational structure. The issue is, should the city modify the organizational structure of the Port Washington Fire Department to address the existing and projected service demand increases, especially emergency medical services? Tonight is for presentation and discussion only. And just a reminder to the community, the council has very limited authority over either the police department or the fire department. We have a publicly appointed police and fire commission. Tonight is really a conversation in order for the council to understand what they'd be supporting in the budget. So, Mr. Brown, Chief, and Joe, you are up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll get this started off. We'll probably take about 15, 20 minutes to recap the report that was contained in the packet. And then answer any questions, comments, discussion that may take part after that. So really tonight what we're talking about is providing sustainable, reliable, and notice the underline with reliable, high-quality fire and emergency medical services to the Port Washington community. So citizens, visitors, anyone who is within our community. We'll go over the existing Port Washington Fire Department, some environmental factors that really create challenges for staffing and the organizational structure as it currently exists. Then we'll talk about some additional challenges related to the same concept. And then really a couple of options for sustainable operations as we move forward to consider.
Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark Mitchell. I'm the fire chief in Port Washington. I've been chief since June of 2004, when I inherited a very robust fire and EMS organization from the former chief, Mark Ernessy. That's not the same almost 19 years later. We have the same kind of numbers, but we don't have the same kind of numbers of local volunteers or paid-on-call people that are coming to our aid in signing up. It's just gotten to be that this is more than a part-time job. Our call volume has increased tremendously. It's outlined in a few pages in your report that was given to you. And it's just getting to the point where, calls after 7, 8 o'clock at night and over midnight, it's hard to get people to get out of bed many times and still be able to get up and go to their full-time jobs. So we've seen a decline in that. And as a result, we instituted what we call a paid-on-premise program a couple of years ago, and that's to bring in part-time people who don't live in the city but want to come and work and develop in either fire EMS, typically they're EMTs or paramedics. We get a lot of students that are in paramedic class that come and ride as EMTs, and they get their paramedic time with us. And they're based in the station. And as a result of that program, we've seen a tremendous decrease in the response times, which is a start. Typically, from the time we get paged to the time that we get on the scene was around 10 minutes. And we've cut that down to under 7 minutes, or under 8 minutes, rather. So what you see in front of you is our basic existing organizational chart. Not all the positions are filled, but they're all in place. And fortunately, we've managed to hire some full-time people this year. We've had a full-time firefighter paramedic in our budget since 2019, and it was hard to keep that individual or that position filled just due to the salary issues and things like that. But we've managed to increase that, and we went full out, and through the ARPA funds, we managed to keep that first full-time position and add 2 more. And we were fortunate enough to also have funding for a full-time deputy fire chief, who's Joe DeBoer, who's with us and has been with us since I was on the department as a volunteer and an explorer, and he's come up through the ranks. And so now we have a full-time firefighter paramedic on duty every day, and then Joe works several days a week, at his choosing, 5 days minimum. Are there any questions about the organizational chart as you see it presented? Okay, there we go. We've expanded our service area quite a bit in the years. We cover about 25 square miles of fire coverage. That's the city and the town of Port Washington. And as the city grows to the south and into the town of Grafton, and some of the subdivisions south of town, we've probably taken on a little more than 25 square miles. We also provide ambulance service to the town of Belgium, basically east of Highway 43 in the town of Belgium, from our town of Port town line and all the way up to the county line in Sheboygan County. We also have a paramedic intercept district that goes as far west as Washington County. We do intercepts with Newburgh, Wabaca, Fredonia, and Belgium. So that's an additional, several miles that we have to cover. And those communities don't have a paramedic service, and we send a paramedic on certain level of responses that the dispatch sees that need for paramedics. And as you know, as elected officials, our city is growing to the point where the population's increasing dramatically. Every year we have new housing being constructed. I just went through the Newman property and see there's 4 houses being built on that property that we'll have many more after that. Multifamily housing is increasing. And one of our biggest volume, if you want to talk about patient demographics, is the aging population. 1/4 of our ambulance calls go to either assisted living facilities or residential facilities of independent seniors. That's not only happening here, it's happening nationwide. As the population of the elderly increases, so do the types of calls that involve that population group. And most of it is fall injuries. That's our number one response, are people who fall. And not necessarily they're injured, but need help either getting back into a chair or bed or just off the ground. And Chief Ingus can attest to this because his patrol officers are out there right along with us. And this didn't happen before. Assisted living facilities always used to take care of the people that fell. But now, due to their liability and the possibility of them getting injured, that's gone by the wayside. So the first call is 911, and we come and help them get off the ground or whatever. So, yeah, it goes back to Tony now.
If you can go back to the last slide, Bob. So probably the most significant thing to note here is just how the demographics of the city has changed over the past 20 years. And the things that I pointed out in the report that we put together was that from 2010 to 2020, what we see is that the early adult age and young kids, so under 5 to about 24, stays relatively flat. And then the same goes for the prime working years of roughly 35, we'll say, to 60. And then the concerning part, and the part that we'll get into a little bit more here as the discussion goes on, is the fact that once you get above that 60 age, that's where we're seeing the most significant population increase for the city. So for example, from 2010 to 2020, the population for 60 and above went up roughly about 1,200 residents. So that's where we start to get into a conversation about service provisions and what that means relative to emergency medical services. This next piece looks at the development outlook for the city. So as it currently stands, the city has roughly 670 acres that can be developed. So it's a significant portion of land. And then to the right there is the housing vacancy rates by area. And it's split between homeowner and rental. And the Department of Housing and Urban Development has these standards to ensure adequate housing choices. And for the homeowner portion, they like to see somewhere between 1% to 2%. And then for rentals, it's between 4% to 6%. So taken together, what you see is that the city does not have adequate housing choices for people as it currently stands with the data here. So that suggests that there is a pent-up demand. But the other piece to that too is the fact that if you look throughout the county, and I was just looking at the MLS or the multiple listing services that properties are on for single-family homes. I think Mequon was like right around 70 houses. Grafton was around like 40. Port's around 25. So there is truly not a whole lot of opportunities for people to move into a lot of communities in the county. The next piece here is just looking at what is the outlook for the city going through 2025. So it's anticipated that somewhere between 2,600 to 5,300 citizens or new residents could move into the community, that there would be about 1,500, 1,600 new households, and about 1,200 new jobs. So a lot of people coming into the community, a lot of people working in the community, putting further stress on the services that the city provides. I'll turn it over to Joe.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Joe DeBoer. I'm one of the deputy chiefs on the department and oversee EMS operations starting in January. So what you're looking at here is a graph kind of outlining our call volume since 2012. So we have a good sample size here, and you can see that except for the COVID year where we had a significant decline in calls, why, we're not really sure, but that was kind of a national trend that we saw. There's been a steady increase in calls for service every single year. Okay. We're averaging an increase of about 8% a year on EMS calls, total. 14% on fire calls and about 7% on EMS calls. So if you look back from 2012, we're running about 635 more calls a year than we were doing back in 2012. So one of the important things that we wanted to illustrate is I think there's a lot of talk that, you know, we're a vacation community and the calls for service typically peak around the summer months. That's not true. If you look at the statistics of our calls, it's very consistent throughout the year. We typically are treating our own citizens when we're out. It's not our vacationing population. Intuitively, as the size of the city grows, we expected our call volume to go up. But as you can tell by the graphs, the increase in calls have significantly outpaced our growth in population. One of the factors here is the aging population. As Administrator Brown had kind of talked about before, that we have seen a trend as our average age in the city goes up. But if you look at national trends or even local trends, almost 21% of Ozaukee County residents are over the age of 65. That will likely increase by 5.6% by 2040, and probably is not going to level off until 2050. Interestingly, more than 65% of our calls, or between 63 and 65% of our calls, are for patients over the age of 65. So the demand for our services is going to continue to rise at least until 2050 at kind of an exponential rate. Can I go to the next slide, please? Go back one, please. So as Chief Mitchell kind of alluded to, as our demographics in the city change, so too where people live. These are a list of our most common addresses for calls. These 8 addresses alone count for about 30% of our call volume. These are all skilled nursing facilities, assisted living, or senior living apartments. Like Chief Mitchell said, a vast majority of these calls for service are patients that have fell, but we still get our normal EMS calls from these facilities. And these are putting a huge burden on our responders and our calls for service. We do have 2 more of these facilities under construction or in planning right now. There's a senior apartment building being built or almost finished on the Belinsky property off of 33, as well as a nursing/assisted living facility on the Prairie's Edge development. This slide is one that kind of caused me to lose a little bit of sleep, to be honest. Using those statistics that we built over the last 10 years, we kind of projected call volume over the next 10 years. With a 7% increase year over year for EMS calls, by 2032, we're expected to run almost 3,000 EMS calls a year. With just a smaller increase, a 3% increase, we're still almost up to that 2,000 call a year mark. This is really taxing our responders. And this is also happening for a couple other reasons. COVID really broke the healthcare system. If anybody's really tried to get in to see their primary care doctor lately, it's darn near impossible, right? So we're seeing people call 911 because they don't have options anymore. They can't get in to see their regular doctor, so they're using us to go to the hospital. They're also noticing when they go to the emergency department, they're backboarding patients, meaning patients that should be admitted to the hospital are just hanging out in the emergency department because there's nowhere to go. So they think taking an ambulance to the emergency department is a way to bypass the line. We've seen that multiple times over the last year. And as Mark mentioned before, the facilities that we saw in the previous slide have implemented no lift policies. So whenever their residents fall, they're not lifting those patients up or helping them, even if they're uninjured. They're relying on emergency medical services to come take care of that patient for them. Not only is that difficult for that patient, but when we get multiple calls at the same time, sometimes we're there taking care of those patients and can't provide an ambulance for somebody that has a more emergent condition going on. Okay. Next one, okay. So in my opinion, the biggest thing that we're fighting right now is sustainable staffing. If you dissect the call volume from the previous slides, we're really an EMS agency that occasionally goes to fires. That doesn't diminish what we do on the fire side, and we do a great job of that, but a vast majority of the work we do is in the emergency medical side of things. Just like the call volume changes, sustainability of staffing is a really complex issue for us. First and foremost, there's been a huge national decline in volunteerism. If anybody's involved in the civic organizations, they can speak to that as well. Now imagine if you had to take a 200 to 2,000 hour class in order to be part of that civic organization. You would have nobody left. You know, our demographics in the city has changed and our members in our department have changed. People are working multiple jobs. Their kids are in multiple sports, and those sports require them to travel, do so on and so forth. And when the average EMS call takes about an hour and 20 minutes, it's hard for them to be able to leave their full-time job or leave their family for that amount of time, especially if they're doing it 3 or 4 times a day. Even when I started, we used to maybe get 1 call in the middle of the night. Now we're getting 2 or 3 calls in the middle of the night. It's impossible to expect part-time or paid-on-call staff to be able to get out of bed and then go to work the next day and function with that level of call volume. The other thing that is really affecting us is the amount of training that is required for us to provide the level of service that we want to provide. The initial class to become a paramedic is about 1,800 hours. That's a lot of time. That's essentially a full-time job for a year. It's no longer kind of that hobby or volunteer type career that we're seeing before. And it's definitely a necessary thing for us to have paramedics. We provide 40 different medications in the pre-hospital setting, tons of different life-saving skills. We're almost a little mobile emergency department on wheels. And it's a skill that our community desperately needs, but it's hard to find people with that skill set, especially wanting them to be paid on call or volunteer. We don't see a lot of volunteer engineers. We don't see volunteer plumbers. We don't see volunteer law enforcement, and it's getting harder and harder for us to find volunteer paramedics, especially with a very, very hot market right now. It's hard to keep those people even in part-time jobs because they're getting scooped up for full-time employment. So like Chief Mitchell said, in 2020, we kind of shook things up a little bit to try to combat that changing market that we were facing. We started with paid on-premise staffing, which essentially was like part-time employment. And for the first time, we were employing people that lived outside of the city. Can you go back a slide yet? Thank you. In only 2 years, we saw a huge increase in our paid on-premise responders or members. In fact, last year, about 65% of our responders were working a paid on-premise shift when there was a call for service. As we're seeing that increase, we're seeing a decline in the paid on-call membership. You can see there only 13% of our responders were paid on call or that traditional responding from home number. And, even more startling there, about 65% of that 13% were covered by 2 people. And of the ones that do both, about half of those calls were covered by 1 person. So we're kind of hanging on by a thread, keeping our ambulance staffed. And in fact, last year we had some troubles doing that. About 40% of the days last year, we were missing about 6 hours of coverage, where we didn't have a fully staffed ambulance and we were relying on mutual aid to help us out. So, and although paid on premise has been a godsend for us in getting staffing, it really presents the same problems that most part-time employers face, right? First, if you're working part-time, you get to pick your hours. How many people want to work midnight shifts or weekend shifts or holidays? Not a lot. When they're captive full-time employees, they kind of got to eat that, okay? The other thing that we notice, month-to-month staffing is unpredictable. Whether it's they got increased shifts at their job, they're getting paid overtime, or if in our field, a lot of full-time firefighter paramedics get what is called mandated, meaning you don't have the option to go home, you get to stay over for another 12 or 24 hours. Guess who suffers on that? The part-time employers suffer on that, and we've had that happen to us a couple of times already because some of our part-time paramedics are employed in other departments. So, and the last thing is it's just unpredictable to keep membership. If you look at that 65%, about 40% of those responders are no longer on our roster in 2023. They've moved on to full-time jobs. They've, started working in the hospital or moved out of the area, myriad of other reasons. So we're kind of in this delicate state with our staffing, and it's hopefully stabilized a little bit with our full-time employees, but again, it's kind of a house of cards. One of our full-time paramedics this week had a baby, so we're scrambling to cover all of his shifts all of a sudden again. So.
You go back one more slide. So this is just kind of the summation of kind of the 3 factors that are heavily impacting the department and will continue to moving forward. So development growth, more people living here, more people working here. On top of that, the people that live here are aging. And then, as the deputy chief just pointed out, we have a staffing model that is increasingly becoming unreliable and not sufficient for the calls for service that we have and are expected to see in the coming years, which is somewhere between, we'll say, 500 to 1,500 additional calls on an annual basis. So if you can go forward, Bob. So this just lays out kind of a number of options that we've explored over the past two and a half years. So working left to right, we'll kind of briefly go over this, but the thing I would point to is the highlighted yellow, the net new revenue needed for Port Washington. So this is looking at all of the different staffing models and saying, based on that model, how much additional revenue would we need to move towards that particular option? So for 2023, we have a budget, revenue expenditures, balanced budget of about $860,000. Then if you move towards the option one, which is the status quo, that is just increasing it. I think it's roughly 3% for next year, 2024. And then there's a series of options, and it kind of sequentially goes over time with how we've investigated these things. So as you may recall, we did we called a phase one feasibility analysis where the Wisconsin Policy Forum came in, along with all the other departments throughout the county. We looked at consolidating. And there was two models that the Policy Forum looked at. There was what they called the higher price model, and that costs $13.2 million a year. And again, this is a full consolidation of all Ozaukee County Fire Departments under one department. The second option, again, a full consolidation of all county departments, which was the lower priced model, was $8.2 million. So we had that conversation, and then along the way, Mequon and Thiensville decided to go on their own direction, and then we were left kind of with central Ozaukee County fire departments, which consisted of Cedarburg, Grafton, Saukville, and Port. With Cedarburg, and again, this is a full consolidation as well, the cost would be approximately $6.5 million. And if you take all of the existing revenue that these departments have, there would be what I'll call a shortage of about $4.5 million. So there would be about $4.5 million that between the four communities, they would have to come up with to support financially this option. Out of that $4.5 million, if we look at the percentage of calls that each of the departments go on, and we just assign the percentage of calls to that $4.5 million, then Port would have to have $2.9 million, $3 million of new revenue for that option. Now, Cedarburg decided they are going to likely go in a direction where they're continuing to maintain their existing department. So that leaves three communities standing. That's Port, Saukville, and Grafton. So looking at that option, the cost decreases roughly, what is that, about $1.3 million to $5.2 million. And the gap there is $3.7 million. And of that, Port would have to come up with $2.2 million. Then the last option, which I'll go over the cost, but then the chiefs can go through what that staffing actually looks like. But what I will say is the staffing between this enhanced Port model and the consolidation options with the central Ozaukee communities is very much the same, but at a lower cost. So if we decided as a community to move forward with just an enhanced Port Washington Fire Department, it would be roughly $1.8 million. And then the revenue that would be needed for that is $1 million. Now, the thing I failed to mention, whether that's the Central Ozaukee County options or this enhanced port option, is that this is all phasing in staffing over multiple years. So, for example, for the option 2B, the actual amount of spend gets up to, and that's where you see the row there, 2029 anticipated expenditures. So again, option 2B gets up to $9 million. Whereas for option 3, it increases rather substantially on a percentage basis, but it's significantly less at $2.5 million. So I'll turn it over to the chiefs to talk about the staffing and what option 3 looks like.
Well, first of all, one of the big disparities between 2B and 3 is the anticipated administrative staffing, which drives the cost way up. That's 9 to 5 extra fire chiefs to do things like training, EMS, and things like that. And our model wouldn't include that because we've got people within our own ranks that are doing that right now at in our model that you'll see here in a minute. Do we have a slide for that?
We have a slide for that, Chief.
Okay, well, our staffing model in the future would try to have a team of 4 full-time firefighter paramedics on 24/7. And then one thing we didn't talk about, the increase in call volume, we get increase of second calls and third calls. And typically, we haven't been able to staff the second or third call. Thirds are somewhat rare, but are increasing. So we have to give those to other departments in a mutual aid fashion. If we would have our 4 people on duty, we could still cover the 2 calls, which we are seeing more and more often. And anytime we give another call away to another community, we're losing revenue. As you know, we bill for ambulance service, and it's a significant amount of revenue we lose every time we turn one over to another agency. We'd still maintain a full-time fire chief and a full-time deputy chief, but we'd supplement our 1 person a day firefighter paramedic to 4. And then we'd still maintain some paid on premise people or part-time paid on call people.
Go for it. So we'd be happy to answer any questions, but the next step would be that we would come back at the March 7th meeting with a recommendation about which option to proceed with.
Questions? Mr. Pleitner?
Yeah, I think the first thing we can probably all agree on is that option 1 is not sustainable, right? I hate to say that number again, Joe. 40% of days last year, there were more than 6 hours without someone available.
Yes, 40% of calls, or 40% of the days last year, we were missing at least 6 hours of coverage. And if you break it down by weekend, about 54% of the weekend days, we were short at least 6 hours of coverage.
Yeah, so I think if we start there, it's knowing that we can't. Option 1 is not where we're headed at all. We can't continue to go down that route. What was interesting to me is that we've been talking for the last several years about how consolidation seems to be the answer. Whoever I talk to, consolidation seems to be the answer. It'll save money. It'll take care of everyone. We'll steal in the equipment. We just talked about the equipment. We're going to improve, hopefully ratify an order for a 2026 truck here pretty quick this evening. But that's not sustainable because of the overhead and the reasons that Chief just mentioned. I don't know if you want to go into that any deeper, Chief, about how we're just paying more administrative.
Well, yeah, the consolidation, the savings there is with capital. But you're not buying a fire truck every day. Typically, a new fire truck, you want 15 years of frontline service and 10 years in reserve. So it's not an everyday purchase. The other thing is we can get rid of fire apparatus, within consolidation. That's one of the benefits. You don't need as many pieces of equipment, but we're a little unique in Port Washington because, we have the lakefront. So our dive team, which is very active, needs equipment, boats, special equipment being carried on a special vehicle to respond to these kind of calls. We also have rural capability, so we always need a tanker to go into the town of Port Washington and mutual aid, as they did last night, down to a barn fire in Grafton. And we have a special pumper set up for rural applications. So the new pumper we're getting in 2026 is going to replace 2. So we're going down from 4 pumpers down to 3. And each one of those 3 pumpers has a specific need that is still required. We need a ladder truck because of the different heights of the buildings. And it's not only the height of the building, but it's the reach to other buildings that may be lower but are offset from the street. So, you know, we're going to be, we can probably shed one of our 3 ambulances, but we're really kind of slimming down quite a bit from the fire apparatus total fleet, and which would mean replacement. We don't have to replace that 4th engine anymore. We won't have to replace a 3rd ambulance. So we're doing our job on this end.
So I guess that's what I'd be curious about is can we realize the benefits of consolidation without consolidating? Can we make sure that an enhanced department within Port Washington will still provide all the services that we need?
Absolutely. I mean, it's Cedarburg has done some of the study. We've done our study. You notice in the report you've been given. It may not mean that there may be consolidation many, many years from now because we're all facing real shortages, but I don't see that happening. And the important thing is with hiring people, we need to be competitive with salaries, and the administrator has factored that in, you know, over the years. This is, you know, not a tomorrow we're going to do it kind of thing. It's going to be phased in over several years, and which the consolidation was going to be over about 4 or 5 years. But yes, I think it's the best option right now, definitely with cost savings and providing a better service.
Yeah, I think that's one thing always to reckon with is that we're generally averse to raising taxes in this community, as most are, but investing in public safety seems to be something that we shouldn't ever have to debate. So with that, I thank you for your time tonight.
So, Chief, thank you. Joe, thank you. I've spent some time with Chief. He's educated me over the years. I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of chiefs in our county, assistant chiefs and things like that, ones that are going through consolidation and others that are just plain struggling. This is not an easy thing. Who knows what our future is going to hold. I applaud you for looking at the data and applying using the numbers and go forward. So I thank you for all of that. Chief, I think if you could just take 2 minutes and talk about ISO ratings and what that is and what the impact, consolidation or not consolidation, or our plan or your recommended plan, the enhanced port would mean to me as a homeowner in the city.
Well, the ISO stands for the Insurance Services Organization. It's a national organization that represents the insurance companies, and that's how your property home insurance is calculated as from a stand of fire safety. The range is a Class 1, which is the best you can have in the country. That's usually reserved for larger municipalities, to a Class 10, which is basically no fire protection at all. Port Washington is fortunate to have an ISO Class 3, which primarily is based on the fact that we're on Lake Michigan and we have an excellent water supply. And then it's broken down not only for water supply, which is 40% of the score, the fire department is 50%, and then communications is 10%. And we really can't get any better on communications. We're being dispatched by Ozaukee County. We have modern, brand new radio system that we're using. There's some computer enhancements that we can probably do that would get us not some more points, but 1 or 2 to get us up there. But the real increase where we have the control over is the fire department side. And the 50% is based on your apparatus, your staffing, your deployment of your apparatus, your fire stations, and things like that. Currently, our Class 3 is just about 3 points away from being a Class 4. And I talked to our ISO service representative, and I told him that we've hired full-time people, and he said next time that we get rated again, will be higher in the class 3. We'll be going from the low 70s up into the mid 70s. So even with more staffing, we should be able to lock in that class 3 for many years to come. The difference between a class 3 and a class 4 benefits commercial properties and multifamily properties. So the property owners that have these type of buildings see the advantage to a class 3. If we drop from a 3 to a 4, they'd see a tremendous increase in their fire insurance. The normal single-family homeowner doesn't really see a difference between a class 3 and a class 4.
Other questions? I have one. Is there anything we can do in ordinances to support the calls where private companies are trying to avoid increasing their mod rates at the expense of the taxpayer?
I assume you're referring to our
Like 4
assisted
times
living.
you guys mentioned that, we get called to assisted living to help people who've fallen because their staff have been told they're not supposed to pick up or support a citizen waiting for us. And that, I just have an ethical issue with that. And if there's something in ordinance that we can do, because they're trying to avoid a modular increase and that doesn't feel right. And why should somebody have to wait when there's a staff member there? I'm just really bothered by that. I would not let one of my employees lay on the ground for 15 minutes waiting for. So I don't know if there's an answer, if that's something council can look into.
Yeah, I
for
would
us.
think that would have to take some investigation, but I know through different funding things, we can't even charge for that. If we don't do anything other than lift the patient, we can't submit a bill for that, so we lose the revenue. If we do have a patient that looks like they're injured, the crews are definitely going to do assessments and things like, they're going to do it anyway. But if they're going to do everything they can to try and convince that person to go to the hospital. But we've had a lot of stubborn people out there that don't want to leave their homes and they just want to help back up in their chair or the same in the facility that they're living in. So we're kind of, our hands are tied as far as revenue.
Yeah, Chief, I thank you for that. I guess when there's a private company that does assisted living who then relies upon city services to support their business at the expense of a citizen, that just doesn't feel right to me. So I don't know what we can do about it. I don't know what other communities have done about it, but it doesn't feel like it should be our liability when there's someone sitting there waiting for us at the expense of someone with maybe a more significant emergency. So if we can look into that, I don't know, that would be
That's
wonderful.
an easy question for my peers on other departments to ask them, but I know it's not being done in Ozaki County that I've heard,
Yeah.
so.
Well, thank you. Any other questions, Mr. Planner?
For option 3, an enhanced Port Washington department, talk to me about staffing, options, people that we can find, recruiting efforts there that we would have to employ to fill up a department in an enhanced setting?
Well, the key is salary. And right now, we're doing really well with entry level. And I think if we can keep people over the 5 years, that we have steps for that, and those increase over the years, just, due to whatever the city does with bumping the salaries up every year, that's something good. But if we would get into the need for a referendum to make this work, I think that would have to include some even better salaries, because we're going for the same type of people that the larger cities that are. We lost a guy, he was with us back in 2020, said he was going to be with us forever, and within 3 to 4 weeks he was gone to Oak Creek, starting from $52,000 with us to I think it was $91,000 top out. But yeah, there's a plus.
Well, that would change my definition of
Yeah.
forever.
But it's significant that
I guess as long as there's a mature sort of way to stepwise people into that, to make it competitive and to make it so we're not just flatlining people and then, right, they leave.
Well, I look at the fire service as being parallel with the police service. And you can ask Chief Hingus what they're starting their rookie police officers at. And, they have the same amount of training hours-wise. We have the same amount of training hours-wise. We have, ongoing training. They've got ongoing training, and I think it's, you mentioned that public safety should be number one, and that's the price of doing business.
Thank you.
Other thing I just wanted to add to that is the salary progression. So from roughly 2025 to 2029, 2030, I want to say we have a firefighter medic going from about 56 up to 86.
I guess I'll just dovetail on that too. And I think one of the smart things about the plan that we've been working on is trying to identify homegrown talent, people that are invested in our community and we know well. One of the spots, instead of having all firefighter paramedics, we would have a firefighter EMT position, at least in our kind of tentative plan. That would give us the opportunity to kind of hire some people that are within our department that have been here for a long time and have shown us that they care about the community and they're good at what they do. That also gives us the ability to send them to paramedic school once we know that they're ready and they know what they're doing. So I think those are almost kind of entry level positions that we can bounce them into those spots to make sure that we're retaining our personnel and training them appropriately.
Okay. Mr. Beaver, I want to thank you for coming this evening and representing the PFC as well. And just my only request is that we don't throw opportunities for stronger efficiencies and collaboration with other communities out, that we continue to review and investigate whatever we need to do to make sure we have those services. So thank you very much for your reports this evening, Chiefs, and Mr. Brown. All right, that moves us into our next agenda item. Let's get crazy with some motions here. Going back to from Standing Council Committees, Finance and Licensing Committee, consideration and possible action on a Class A liquor and beer license for Port's Cozy Corner. The council is being asked to consider this. The city clerk has reviewed and approves the application and required documents. The police chief has also approved the background check for the establishment and its agent. Therefore, the recommendation is to approve the license as presented.
So as I had reported to the Finance and License Committee, this comes from a local businessman and his wife who are running currently this establishment in downtown Port Washington on Franklin Street and Main Street. I think you'll previously recognize it is Beaver Travel in its previous existence. They are requesting this Class A license so they are able to sell beer and wine at their establishment. In order to do the wine, they are required to have a liquor license because Class C wine can only be issued to businesses that have restaurants. So the Class A is a class and carry, as we call it. So it's for sale and consumption off premise. And there are other establishments naturally that have these. They could be some of our gas stations and convenience stores. There are other shops that have this as well. This applicant and their background check came up with no issues with Chief Hingus, and their corporation also came back with no issues. So I'm recommending approval as presented.
There's a motion to support that.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions or concerns on the motion, Mr. Sigwart?
Yeah, Susan, they just merely have to have someone of age within the building to sell the product, is that right? They have to have an individual with an operator license. On the premise all the time? On the premise or within eyesight of another. Okay.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Let's have some fun. We don't get to buy fire trucks around here very often. So the next one is to ratify the action to order a 2026 Pierce Enforcer pumper truck. The recommendation was made to approve this at the February 13th, 2023 meeting. The Police and Fire Commission reviewed a revised proposal from Reliant Fire Apparatus Incorporated, which is the dealership for the Pierce Manufacturing, for the purchase of a 2026 Pierce Enforcer pumper truck for $956,354. I'm wondering what the monthly payment is for 60 months on that vehicle. Commissioner Dean recommended that the proposal be reviewed by the city attorney prior to the council's action on the 22nd, and the staff recommends the accept and sign the proposal placement order for a total cost not to exceed $975,000. Council, was that reviewed?
Yes, I did review that, and as of, I don't know, late morning or early afternoon,
I approve the document, the purchase agreement as revised. So if you're going to ratify the agreement with Reliant Fire Apparatus, Inc., I would ask that the motion include a reference to the latest version of that dated today's date, February 27th. I can go through any changes. I can just, if you wish, I'm happy to do that, but they're largely cleaning up definitions and inserting terms that I think were a little bit lacking in the earlier version. And I'm happy to say that we were able to resolve questions over the insurance aspects of the document. So it has my approval with the proviso that any motion reference the February 27th version as the final version. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Chief, do you have anything to add?
No, that I just was surprised about how long it's going to take this vehicle. And for my many years in the fire service, I've ordered fire trucks at the beginning of the year. We get them at the end of the year, but to find out that we're ordering one at the beginning of the year and getting it sometime in 33 to 36 months is very unusual. But that's the backlog in the entire industry that the pandemic caused with shutdowns of factories, and the supply chain thing is still a problem. And we also had a curveball thrown at us at the last minute, and that's why the commission had to act to order this Cummins diesel, which is one of the major diesel providers for motors, is coming up with a new motor in 2026 that'll cost between $80,000 and $100,000 more. And we had to get our order in by Valentine's Day on the 14th. We were planning on having this done for you for your council meeting last week to approve, but with that deadline moved up, we had to do that at the Police and Fire Commission just to get the order in with our dealership. Otherwise, it would have been that kind of an increase. Plus, there was a Pierce increase of about $28,000 on March 1st, which we knew about, and we would have been under that deadline if they didn't move the other one up for the new motor. So we won't be getting the new motor because it's the order is being placed now for an existing motor. So this all has to do with environmental.
I did have one question. We cannot purchase direct from Pierce. We have to go through a franchise, a dealership?
Well, the check is made out to Pierce at time of delivery, correct?
Okay. Well, I just appreciate that the money's at least staying in Wisconsin.
Yes.
All right.
Well, and Reliant is located in Slinger, so they get their percentage, but everything's homegrown.
Yeah, well, conference rival.
Better football.
Any other questions for the chief? Mr. Newmeyer?
Tier 4 engine, is that what the increase was going to be?
Excuse me?
Is it going to be a Tier 4 engine? Is that what the increase was going to be for the new engine?
Oh, I don't know if it's what the tier is, but I know in 2027 is when the EPA is requiring these new environmental things, and Cummins is moving it up to 2026. In fact, one of my captains works for KMC Stamping, and they're a big supplier of components to Cummins, and they're already working on whatever that motor is going to be. So the engineering's not complete yet, but the estimate is between $80,000 and $100,000 more that we're saving.
Thank you.
Mr. Benning?
From a finance standpoint, I think it's to note is we're not writing a check today. We'll be writing a check around the delivery time in 2026. So, this is not in our CIP budget for this year or next year. It will have to be included in a future plan. So just so we're clear on that one at this point.
And I might want to add, the administrator had this question. Pierce does offer prepayment, but it's upfront. And, we don't have it in our budget this year, but even if we did, and they ask for delivery in 3 years, I don't think that makes fiduciary sense to let somebody invest your money for 3 years before you get your product, so.
So with that, I'll make the motion to ratify the agreement, the February 27th agreement as approved by the city attorney.
Second that.
There's a motion and a second. Are there any questions or comments on the motion? All right, seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. All right, Chief, you're getting a truck in 5 years. 3 years, yeah. Congratulations, Joe, you're getting a new truck. All right, so moving into Resolution 2023-1 to provide local matching funds relating to the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources grant to control urban stormwater runoff, pollution sources, and commitment to support the project funded by the grant. The staff recommendation is that the resolution to provide a local match for urban nonprofit and stormwater grant and commit to support the project funded by the grant. Mr. Strom.
Yes, so this is a DNR grant for stormwater, as mentioned in the resolution. Last time we applied for this, we missed this grant by less than a point, I understand. So what this resolution does, it says we went ahead and budgeted the money last year for this year's budget. So that this is saying, hey, we budgeted the money, we're going to spend the money on this grant. And then the second thing this resolution does is it says the city's committees and the city's council is behind this project. So that will also get us some additional points for awarding the grant. So essentially what the grant will be spent on is updating our ordinances, updating our modeling, which are pollutant loads in the city.
Any questions or concerns?
I would move to approve.
Is there a second for that motion? All right, any questions or concerns on that? All right, seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes. All right, next one is to go into the Traffic Safety Committee, ordinance 2023-2, an ordinance creating and repealing parking restrictions on North Lake Street. The staff recommends the city prohibit parking on the west side of North Lake Street between East Washington Street and East Pierce Street, and on the east side of North Lake Street from East Washington to East Jackson Street. Who is writing these sentences? Okay, so Roger, you're back up.
Here, I'll take this one. Yeah,
Rob, you're going to take it?
Yeah, my contribution to the team.
Yeah. Great sentence.
So, this again was, this is a second reading. It comes from traffic safety, and essentially this is a cleanup of our ordinances from previous signage that was on Lake Street prior to the construction starting. The only difference is we eliminated one space on the east side of Lake Street, essentially in front of Newport Shores. That space was eliminated because of the addition of a driveway opening, and plus this enabled us to widen the sidewalk substantially in front of the building, which is more in scale with, the size of the building. It had a tiny little sidewalk in front of it. And so now that giving up the one parking space improved the, again, the sidewalk area in front of Newport Shore. So again, the recommendation is to approve of the ordinance in front of you. Are there any questions?
Is there someone willing to make a motion?
I move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second?
Moved and second. Any questions or concerns on the ordinance change? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. All right, the next one is C1, which is a consideration of possible action on a lease agreement with Port Washington Tourism Council. My understanding from committee is that we are tabling that. Is that accurate? All right, we will move into C2 then, ordinance 2023-4 relating to penalties for an enforcement of building, electrical, and plumbing code violations. Staff recommends council approval. Emily.
Thank you. This ordinance was brought before this body in September of last year. You advised to research a couple different aspects of the ordinance. One, the original ordinance stated that the property maintenance applied to 1- and 2-story buildings, and then also advised us to look at a scaled violation system. So we did correct the 1- and 2-story to match the language in the rest of the ordinance, to say any building, structure, or premise in violation of the chapter. And then did also go back and create a step system for the penalties. So what this ordinance will do, also in talking with our building instructor, Gary, he asked us to add in the plumbing and electrical codes to this ordinance as well, so it would be consistent across each of the codes. So what this ordinance will do is grant Gary or grant the building inspector or his designee citation authority to issue citations for any violations of the building code, plumbing code, or electrical code. And then it will also, as stated earlier, have a graduated schedule for penalties and updates those penalty amounts to, one, encourage compliance to the code, and two, to better match with the comparable municipalities around us. This is a first reading, and I am available for any questions.
Any questions? All right. Thank you, Emily. All right, and the next one is City of Port Washington Plan Commission, Ordinance 2022-3, amending the zoning ordinance relating to historic preservation. This is a first reading of this. This was reviewed at Planning Commission. It's just a simple update to include the most recent information from the historical and intensive survey report. Ms. Harris, anything to add?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, you summed it up quite nicely. Just
Pay attention.
this council saw the update to the city's historic intensive survey report. It was 1998, and the 22 report was here in November. And with that update, we want to include that in the relevant part of the city zoning code, which is this 2030, which refers to historic preservation and review of properties in cases of construction, alteration, raising, et cetera.
Excellent. Any questions for Bob? All right. We have completed the new business. We have no unfinished business. Do we have any public comments or appearances? Any? No, okay. All right, we're going to keep moving. Chris, I just thought maybe tonight you'd. All right, I'm going to read two motions here. We're going to go into closed session. The first motion to convene in a closed session per Wisconsin State Statute 19.85, Section 1C, for the purpose of considering employment, promotion, compensation, and other terms and conditions of employment or performance evaluation of any public employee over which the governing body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, to wit, the city administrator's performance review. So, and then a second motion, or the same can I do two, or are they separate motions? All right, so I'm looking for a motion to accept going into closed session for a performance review for the city administrator.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. All right, we're going to go to Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 3, Ward 4,
Aye.
Ward 5, Ward 6. Aye. Ward 7. All right, we're in closed session for that item. Now, the second item to go into closed session for is pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute 19.85, Section 1G, to confer with legal counsel for the common counsel who is rendering advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the council with respect to litigation in which it and/or the city officers are or are likely to become involved. Is there a motion to approve that?
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
All right. Alderman, Ward 1? Aye. Ward 2? Aye. Ward 3? Aye. Ward 4? Aye. Ward 5? Aye. Ward 6? Aye. And Ward 7? Aye. We are now in closed session.